Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. This time we're going on a trip to Mars. But not just any trip. We're
Yeah.
going back in time to 1918 to be exact, to explore this silent Danish film. It's called A Trip to Mars.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's this fascinating early sci-fi flick that it's not just about spaceships and aliens, but it gives us this peek into a world grappling with some seriously heavy stuff. I mean, World War One.
Right.
Can you imagine in the midst of all that global turmoil, this film dares to dream of a peaceful journey to another planet?
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to dive into this one.
Yeah.
I think it'll give us a lot to think about in terms of how early sci-fi reflected the hopes and anxieties of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the film acts as this powerful allegory for peace,
Mm.
placing a war-torn Earth
Mm.
in stark contrast with a Martian society.
Yeah.
That's practically utopian. It's
Right.
almost like the filmmakers were saying, look, there's a better way for humanity to exist.
And the way they portray the Martians is so interesting. I mean, they're these sophisticated beings who communicate telepathically, live as strict vegetarians. They even have a dance of chastity.
Oh, wow.
Talk about culture shock for those Earthling explorers,
Oh,
right?
deep time. But
But the film doesn't just paint humans as the bad guys. There's this internal tension, even among the human crew itself.
right, you're right.
You remember David Dane, the boisterous alcoholic American?
Okay.
He tries to start a mutiny mid-flight.
He does. That's right.
Yeah, it's almost as if the filmmakers are saying, look, even faced with this incredible journey, we humans still struggle with our own internal conflicts.
Yeah, it sounded
It's like this constant tug of war between our better angels and our, let's say, less refined instincts. So we have this film made in 1918, grappling with peace, conflict, what it means to be human, all wrapped up in this journey to Mars.
It's pretty amazing.
But here's where it gets really cool. A Trip to Mars is potentially the first feature-length science fiction film to seriously depict space travel.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And there's another important genre element at play here, too. Space opera.
Ah, yes. Space opera, which you can think of as this grand sweeping subgenre of science fiction. It's characterized by this blend of adventure, romance, social commentary, and fantastical elements, all set against a backdrop of, well, space.
Right.
And A Trip to Mars is like a prime example. It even predates Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which didn't come out until almost a decade later.
Yeah, it really blows my mind to think that this silent film from Denmark, made over a century ago, was laying the groundwork for so much of what we love about science fiction today. Now, full disclosure, when I first saw images of the Excelsior, the spaceship in the film,
Okay.
I couldn't help but chuckle. It kind of looks like a biplane had a baby with a dirigible.
Well, you have to keep in mind that aviation was still in its early stages back then. I mean, the Wright brothers had only made their first successful flight in 1903. So this image of a spaceship with wings and a propeller really captures the dreams of that era. It's a fascinating reflection of how they envisioned venturing into the cosmos.
And those dreams extended to the production design, too, which is surprisingly ambitious for the time, especially considering the limitations they had back then.
Absolutely. Nordisk Films Compagnie, the studio behind the film, they were like a powerhouse in Europe at the time, known for their large-scale productions. And A Trip to Mars was no exception. The way they created the Martian civilization with these grand, almost otherworldly sets, that's a real testament to the artistry and imagination of the filmmakers.
It makes you wonder what went through their minds, as they were building these sets, trying to envision what an alien world would look like. And let's not forget the director, Holger-Madsen. He was known more for his social dramas.
Right.
But this film shows a different side of his talent.
Yes, it does.
The way he uses lighting, playing with light and shadow to create this sense of wonder and mystery is very effective. But let's go back to the characters for a second, because I'm really intrigued by Professor Dubious.
Yeah.
Even his name, Dubious, meaning doubtful. It's like this blatant symbol.
It's so perfectly fitting, isn't it?
Yeah.
He embodies skepticism. Always questioning, always doubting. You could say he represents that part of humanity that resists progress, that's afraid of the unknown.
It's almost as if he's a cautionary figure, warning us about the potential pitfalls of progress without careful consideration.
That's a great point. And in contrast to Professor Dubious, we have Maria, the Martian leader's daughter. She's such a captivating character.
Yeah.
There's this scene where she takes Avanti, one of the explorers, to this ethereal forest of love.
Oh, yeah.
and they declare their love for each other.
Yeah.
It's incredibly romantic, wouldn't you say?
It's a visually stunning scene for sure, but it also feels very symbolic. I mean, Maria seems to embody the compassion and understanding of the Martian people, and her choice to return to Earth with Avanti. It's like a beacon of hope.
It is.
A suggestion that the Martians want to share their peaceful ways with humanity.
It's like they're offering us a chance to learn from them, to evolve beyond our destructive tendencies.
Speaking of evolving, let's unpack the science in A Trip to Mars. Let's just say it doesn't always hold up to modern scrutiny. Like, for instance, the explorers don't even need oxygen masks on Mars.
Right.
It makes you wonder what audiences back then thought about the possibilities of space travel.
Well, our scientific understanding has come a long way since 1918. Back then, the very notion of space travel was still very much in the realm of imagination. But even though some of the details might seem quaint now, I think it's important to remember that the film was actually trying to engage with hard science.
So it wasn't just a whimsical fantasy.
Not at all. They show the explorers calculating the trajectory of their journey, monitoring fuel consumption, dealing with the challenges of navigating through space. They were attempting to ground the story in some sort of scientific reality, even if it seems a little off to us now.
It's like they were trying to bridge the gap between fantasy and reality, using the scientific knowledge of their time to make the story feel more believable.
Exactly. And what's particularly interesting is that while the film might get some of the technical details wrong, its exploration of the psychological challenges of space travel is remarkably prescient. The crew's near mutiny, brought on by boredom and isolation. These are issues that we still grapple with in real-life space missions today.
It's fascinating how those emotional and psychological challenges remain timeless, even as our scientific understanding evolves.
Precisely. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that makes A Trip to Mars so compelling. It's this unique blend of early science fiction, social commentary, and yes, some unintentionally funny moments when viewed through a modern lens. It shows us how much our knowledge has advanced, while highlighting these enduring human challenges that transcend time and technology.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It really is.
It's interesting how the film tries to balance this, this scientific ambition with a more fantastical element. Like, for example, take the Martian civilization. They're not your typical little green men, are they?
Definitely not. They're depicted as these elegant, almost ethereal beings. I love how they're dressed in these white robes. It gives them this serene, otherworldly presence.
And the fact that they communicate telepathically, it's such a unique and forward-thinking concept for a film made in 1918.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder where the filmmakers got their inspiration. I mean, telepathy wasn't exactly a mainstream idea back then.
Well, there was a growing interest in psychic phenomena and the potential of the human mind. Around that time, perhaps the filmmakers were tapping into that, burgeoning fascination.
It's like they were exploring the possibility that there are other forms of communication beyond spoken language.
Exactly. And the Martian society, as depicted in the film, is this fascinating blend of ancient wisdom and futuristic idealism. They seem to have achieved this perfect harmony between technological advancement and spiritual enlightenment.
It's like they've transcended all the things that we humans struggle with. War, greed, violence. They've reached a higher level of consciousness.
And I think that's part of what makes the film so compelling. It presents this vision of what humanity could become if we were to shed our more destructive tendencies.
But of course, conflict is essential to any good story, even one set on Mars.
Absolutely. And that's where the human element comes into play. Even when confronted with this, utopian societies, some of the crew members still struggle with their less than ideal impulses. Think about David Dane. With his drinking and attempted mutiny.
Yeah, he's such a great example of how we humans can sometimes be our own worst enemies, even when presented with incredible opportunities.
In the scene where they shoot the bird on Mars.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great example, too.
I'd almost forgotten about that. It's almost comical how casually they just kill this creature in front of these pacifist Martians.
It's a stark reminder of how carelessly destructive we humans can be, even with good intentions.
It's that disconnect between our ideals and our actions. Something we all grapple with from time to time, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I think that disconnect is one of the reasons A Trip to Mars feels so relevant, even today. It's a reminder that our journey towards a better future isn't just about technological progress, but also about personal growth and evolution.
You're right. It's about expanding our consciousness, embracing empathy, and compassion.
Exactly. And I think that was the message the filmmakers were trying to convey with this film. A call to strive for peace, not just globally, but within ourselves.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, even in the face of differences. Now, earlier we talked about how the science in A Trip to Mars might seem a bit off to modern viewers, but I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, the psychological challenges of space travel.
Right.
How does the film handle that aspect?
It's actually quite fascinating. Remember how the crew almost mutinied due to boredom and isolation? Well, those are still major concerns. In real-life space missions today, imagine being confined to a small spaceship for months or even years on end, far away from everything familiar. It takes a huge psychological toll.
Yeah, it's like this pressure cooker of emotions, intensified by the extreme environment and, the high stakes of the mission.
Exactly. And A Trip to Mars highlights these psychological challenges in a way that feels surprisingly ahead of its time. It's not just about the technical aspects of space travel, but also about the human toll it takes.
But ultimately, despite the challenges, the film seems to suggest that reaching out to other worlds and encountering different civilizations is ultimately a worthwhile endeavor.
Right. I think so. There's this sense of optimism and hope that runs through the film. Even amidst the conflicts and challenges, it suggests that we as humans have the potential to overcome our limitations and connect with others in meaningful ways, even across vast distances.
And that message is further emphasized by Maria's decision to return to Earth with Avanti. It's not just a love story. It's a statement about the Martians' willingness to engage with humanity, despite our flaws.
That's a great observation. It shows that the Martians aren't just content, existing in their own utopia. They want to help humanity evolve. They see our potential, even if we don't always see it ourselves.
It's like they're extending an olive branch, offering us a chance to learn from their wisdom and create a better future together. I imagine seeing that message on screen in 1918, during the horrors of World War I, must have been incredibly impactful.
It must have been. It's as if the film is saying, look, there's hope for humanity. We don't have to be defined by conflict and destruction. We can choose a different path.
Speaking of the historical context, the film was made in Denmark, which remained neutral during World War I. Do you think that neutrality might have influenced the film's message?
It's a fascinating question. It's certainly possible that Denmark's neutrality gave the filmmakers a unique perspective on the conflict.
They were able to observe the horrors of war from a distance without being directly embroiled in it.
Exactly. And that might have fueled their desire to create a film that advocated for peace and understanding, a film that offered a glimpse of a world beyond the trenches and battlefields.
It's like they were trying to offer an alternative to the violence and division that was consuming Europe at the time, a vision of a future where humanity could come together in peace and harmony.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the film's message still resonates so strongly today. It transcends the specific historical context of its creation and speaks to a universal human longing for peace and connection.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together and that we have a responsibility to create a better world for ourselves and future generations.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us, especially as we continue to grapple with new challenges and uncertainties in the 21st century.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope for a better future, and that we all have a role to play in creating that future.
As we've been talking about A Trip to Mars, it's striking how this film made over a century ago still feels so relevant today.
Yeah, it really does. It's a testament to the power of its themes and the way it taps into these fundamental human desires for peace, connection, and understanding.
Right.
So we've explored the film's pacifist message, its pioneering role in science fiction, and those wonderfully quirky scientific details.
Right.
But now let's zoom out a bit and consider the cultural landscape that gave birth to this film.
Yeah, it's crucial to remember that A Trip to Mars wasn't created in a vacuum. It was very much a product of its time, reflecting the anxieties and aspirations of a world on the brink of massive change.
Right, we're talking about 1918, the final year of World War I. Europe was deeply scarred by the conflict.
Yes.
And there was this sense of disillusionment, this longing for something better.
Exactly. And in many ways, A Trip to Mars offered audiences a form of escapism. It allowed them to imagine a world beyond war, a world where peace and harmony prevailed. It was a welcome respite from the grim realities of the time.
But it wasn't just pure escapism. There's also this element of social commentary woven into the narrative, this subtle critique of human nature.
Absolutely. The way the film juxtaposes a war-torn Earth with the utopian Martian society is a powerful statement about the destructive nature of human conflict. It's almost as if the filmmakers were holding up a mirror to society and asking, is this really the path we want to continue down?
And then there's Professor Dubious, the embodiment of skepticism and cynicism.
Right.
It's interesting how he serves as this counterpoint to the idealism of Avanti and the other explorers.
He's a fascinating character, isn't he? Almost a cautionary figure. He represents that part of humanity that resists change, that clings to old ways, even when they're clearly not working. It's as if the filmmakers are saying, look, if we want to create a better future, we need to be willing to challenge the status quo and embrace new ways of thinking.
It makes you wonder if Professor Dubious was meant to represent those who clung to the old world order, those who couldn't envision a future beyond war and conflict.
It's a very plausible interpretation. After all, the film was made during a time of immense upheaval, when old certainties were crumbling and people were grappling with the possibility of a radically different future.
Right. And in contrast to Professor Dubious, we have the Martians, these wise and benevolent beings who have seemingly transcended the flaws of humanity.
It's interesting how the film portrays them, isn't it? They're not the typical Hollywood aliens who come to conquer or destroy. Instead, they're these peaceful, enlightened beings who have achieved this level of spiritual and technological advancement that humans can only dream of.
I particularly love the detail that they're vegetarians. It's such a subtle but effective way of emphasizing their peaceful and compassionate nature.
You're right. It subtly reinforces their connection to nature and their respect for all living beings. It goes beyond just saying they are peaceful. It shows us through their actions and lifestyle.
Yeah, and the fact that they communicate telepathically, it's such a striking metaphor for the power of empathy and understanding.
It really is. It suggests that true communication goes beyond words. It's about connecting with others on a deeper, more intuitive level. It's about understanding their thoughts, their feelings, their intentions, even without spoken language.
It's almost as if the film is suggesting that. If we could all tap into that kind of empathy, if we could truly understand each other's perspectives, maybe conflict wouldn't be so inevitable.
That's a beautiful thought, and I think it's at the heart of what A Trip to Mars is trying to convey. It's not just about a journey to another planet. It's about a journey towards a more enlightened and compassionate way of being.
Speaking of journeys, the film was rediscovered and restored in the 21st century, allowing modern audiences to appreciate this almost forgotten masterpiece. What do you think is the lasting legacy of A Trip to Mars? Why should people watch it today?
I think A Trip to Mars offers us several valuable things. First, it's a fascinating window into the early days of science fiction cinema. It shows us how filmmakers were grappling with the possibilities of space travel long before it became a reality.
It's like this time capsule of early 20th century dreams and anxieties about the future.
Exactly, but beyond its historical significance. A Trip to Mars still has this powerful message for us today. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, we have the capacity to imagine a better future, to envision a world beyond conflict and division.
And perhaps more importantly, it encourages us to actively strive for that better future, to work toward creating a world where peace, understanding, and compassion prevail.
It's a call to action, a reminder that we're not just passive observers, we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into A Trip to Mars, what final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with?
I'd simply encourage everyone to seek out this film and experience it for themselves. It's visually stunning, thought-provoking, and surprisingly relevant. Even after all these years, let it spark your own imagination and encourage you to reflect on the kind of future you want to create.
Beautifully said. And I hope our deep dive into A Trip to Mars has inspired you to explore further, to delve into those forgotten corners of cinematic history, and to discover those hidden gems that still have something valuable to say about our world today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.